And welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Matt Vischer. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Bob Oakes, who represents the 130th Assembly District of Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego counties. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're a post-budget wrap-up, if you will, as this is the Assemblyman's first show since the budget was passed in a marathon session on March 31st. It was a Monday. Ran all day, Assemblyman, as is quite typical for budget marathon passages, if you will. And so we're going to do a pretty much a wrap-up and get the Assemblyman's overall thoughts on the budget as it compares to budgets of years past. Good to see you, sir.
Well, good to see you, Ed. And you know, in this budget, on the positive side, we had a fourth straight on-time budget for New York State. It stayed within the 2% overall spending cap that's really not imposed by law, but it's self-imposed. It's where the governor's target is, and it's very honestly, before the governor said it, our Republican conference said we need to stay within a growth area, and that 2% is where we had established that. We had seen budgets back in the mid-2000s, 2007, 2008, with budgets increasing 11%, 7 or 8%. You can't sustain, unless the economy is just exploding, you can't sustain that type of increased spending. And so getting our spending under control has been very important. Obviously, are there areas we still could do better in pulling back and maybe changing some of the priorities, spending less, obviously. But at least if we are spending at a more reasonable rate, it gives us an opportunity for if the economy's doing recovering somewhat, those revenues are going up, and we've been able to have balanced budgets over the last few years, as well as staying within that spending cap that we have. So that's what I would say really is on the positive. We were able to put some increased funding into our schools. They had actually resources taken away from them that they had depended on before, but when we had a really tough budget years 2 or 3 years ago, we were actually taking dollars away from them. We were able to put some of those dollars back in. Personally, I don't think we shifted the money quite as much as we should have to some of the districts that need it the most. You know, I represent a lot of lower wealth, rural school districts. It's very difficult for them. They depend a lot on state aid. They lost, when money was taken away, a lot more per student than some of the more wealthy districts. And so the state aid was very difficult for them and for them to keep up programs. So we've seen a lot of cuts in those rural areas. It's been very difficult for them, but hopefully we can start to see some shifts to their favor. Where I think the budget came up short, it didn't change some of the priorities that I would like to see. We did do some tax cuts that are affecting manufacturing that should help some, but we ended up leaving tax rates either at rates where we are still not competitive. You compare the business climate here along with the business climate in many of the other states that we compete directly with, New York State is still out of whack. And so this budget, I think we had an opportunity to make some progress in that way, and we came up short there. But overall, when you look at it, I would say some wins, some losses. $137 billion. If you take the 19 million New Yorkers, it's close to $7,000 that we are spending for every man, woman, and child in New York State. Family of four, that's $28,000 of state spending. That's a lot of dollars that is being that are being distributed around the state. That's a huge responsibility, I think, in how we disperse those dollars. Certainly for me, the main responsibilities that we have in the state is keeping our people safe and then educating our children so that the next generation is prepared to move forward. And sometimes when we argue about how the budget, what the priority should be, we end up with different perspectives and how those come out.
Unfunded mandates, always a top concern and has been for years now in New York State. Basically, the added costs passed down from the state to local municipalities. On budget night, you introduced an amendment to the budget bill, well, there were, 8 or 9 budget bills, that essentially would put a 3-year moratorium on unfunded mandates. So let's go ahead and roll that to tape, and we'll come back and discuss in further detail with Assemblyman Bob Oakes.
As you know, local governments are hit with a double-edged sword. We've got a tax cap that we put on, which was an effort to control costs, but on the other end, we haven't given them the mandate relief and the flexibility to be able to make the cost savings that they need to. We also created the council, a council that's in law that we did in 2011, which says consider recommendations and turn those into savings for the state. Unfortunately, we have not taken the next step, and I believe this bill would. It would put a 3-year moratorium on unfunded mandates, providing immediate relief to local governments so that we don't put others on. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, when the governor was first elected, I sent a letter to him on the day he was inaugurated and said, Governor Cuomo, why don't you initiate now a 3-year moratorium on mandates so that we can have an opportunity to take the time to look at what we already have and make better decisions for this state. Local governments would be begging for it. Maybe next year, if we didn't have so much money as we have this year to help our local school districts, for instance, next year if we had little or none, we could at least give them mandate relief to move forward. And so I ask all my colleagues to seriously consider this and vote yes with me on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, Assemblyman, as we have found, which is typically the case, we offer up amendments to the budget bills, and any bill for that matter, and they are typically shot down. A lot of them are based on good merits, and unfunded mandates has always been a concern. The cost drivers on local governments, and that essentially would have answered some of their concerns over the next 3 years. But unfortunately, that's not going anywhere.
It did go to defeat, and so if you look at where a large part of the first part of the year is crafting the budget, listening to people's response to the governor's proposal, then the legislature negotiating back and forth with the governor on what the final budget will be. Now that we're beyond that, actually mandate relief, if you look at what priorities are now going forward for the rest of this session, what's going to happen in May and June as we go forward, I believe that we should focus right on that specific issue. Again, the governor created, as I mentioned in that clip, the governor created a mandate relief council. It's been established to listen, to give perspectives, and then to make some recommendations on how we could provide some mandate relief to our municipalities and our school districts. And that council has basically been silent. And the reason for that, I think, it's difficult because some people's mandates are other people's protections. Interesting issue, if you want to just think about that. Right now, this is a little bit different, but I think it's illustrative of this. We have local speed zones, how fast you can drive. You can drive 55 in New York unless otherwise posted, right? That's our law. But we have the authority to change the speed is left up to the state, not the localities. So you don't drive through an area and all of a sudden it drops to 40 for apparently no reason, go back up, go back down, whatever. But we do have some areas that might be high congestion where the localities ask for to have it changed. The question is, right now, a state engineer looks at that, they do a study, and it's determined. Some people would like to give the authority to the town board. And so give the authority there instead of over here. Highway superintendents, some of them agree with that and some of them disagree with it, because if your house, hey, you have speeders by your house, you might go to your town board and say, I want the speed limit reduced. But maybe you're one person and it's really not a problem, but you're overly sensitive to it. The town board might change it because of you coming without really a study about it. And so I guess when I'm saying that, state law and how it impacts and who has authority can be important. But when you look at the mandates that we're talking about here, you are talking more about a lot of the things that are cost drivers that the state ends up saying, locality, you town, village, you've got to do these things, and it ends up pushing your budget up with no money behind it.
So as a viewer, if you're watching from home, we often get into this lingo, this Albany lingo. What would be examples of unfunded mandates?
Well, there's a number of things. Some of them could be, one of the big cost drivers is, for instance, retirement system, the type of retirement system that you have. The cost of that is borne by the local municipality for their employees.
Health benefits, public pensions.
Absolutely. And so those things, as the costs have gone up, those drivers have gone up and have made the taxes at the local level go up. It also could be the type of thing of how much transportation you have to provide to the students in your school. It could be things like reports that you have to make to the state. So there can be annoying and minimal mandates, and there can be very high cost, dramatic mandates. The question is, it's very easy at the state level to say, we need to have this information, school district provide this. We need to have this. And so the laws over the years have stacked up, and there are literally hundreds and thousands of mandates that have been put on that have just grown over the years. We're looking at, take a good look at all of these. If we put a moratorium, don't create any more. Let's stop. Let's take a look at these, and then let's go forward. Let's get rid of some that have aged out. Let's perhaps adjust some that may have become too costly. And let's try to deal with these in a different way. And another one, for instance, handicapped education. There's some federal regulations, there's some state regulations. What are the appropriate ones? Many states just meet the federal standards and not above. Maybe we should look at some of the things of trying to follow federal standards and like everybody else does, and maybe not do it as costly as it might be being done right now.
Well, we had planned to discuss some legislative priorities during this show, but unfortunately we are out of time. We'll have to pick that up again next time. Good to see you, sir. If you'd like to reach out to Assemblyman Bob Oakes, you can do so by contacting his district office at 10 Leach Road. That's in Lyons, New York, 14489. You can call Assemblyman Bob Oakes at 315-946-5166, or you can email him at oaksr@assembly.state.ny.us. Sir, you're also on Facebook.
We are.
You can reach out to the Assemblyman on Facebook.
Absolutely.
On Facebook, yeah. Reach out to him on Facebook, look him up, and say hello. Thank you very much for joining us today. Until next time, take care.